Story 1. If you hear the bell after midnight, do not answer. I found a notice taped to my apartment door, printed on thick, expensive-feeling paper. No letterhead, no official stamp. It's just a title, Night Watch Temporary Assignment. Beneath it in smaller print, rules enclosed. Read before accepting. ... A normal person would have thrown it away. But I was broke, and curiosity is a weakness of mine. So I opened the unsealed envelope. The job was a local legend of sorts. Every winter, the town council hired a night watcher. The pay was shockingly high for a 6-hour shift that required 0 qualifications. The catch: no one ever kept the job for more than a few days. People would start, work 1 or 2 nights, and then just disappear from town. They'd take their fat paycheck and leave without a word. Locals had learned not to ask questions. It was just one of those weird town traditions everyone accepted. The high turnover rate was the reason they were always hiring, and I suppose the reason the notice ended up on my door. They were getting desperate. At the very center of our quiet town stands an old bell tower. It's more of a landmark than anything functional. There's no rope, no visible mechanism to ring the bell. It just hangs there, a silent, dark shape against the sky. Officially, it hasn't been rung in over 100 years. That's the story they tell the tourists anyway. The real story, the one whispered between locals, is a little different. That bell, they say, still rings, just not for any reason you'd find in a history book. And the night watcher's job, I was about to find out, was directly connected to it. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, not printed like the notice, but handwritten in a shaky, urgent script. The rules were simple, but each one felt heavier than the last. 1. Your shift begins at sunset. Do not be late. 2. Once you enter the tower, you cannot leave until sunrise. The door locks from the outside. 3. If you hear the bell ring, note the time. Do not investigate the sound. 4. After midnight, you will hear voices. They may sound like people you know. Do not respond. 5. If the bell rings twice in quick succession, hide. Stay hidden until you feel it is safe. 6. If the bell rings 3 times, pray it does not ring again. There was no signature, no contact number, just those 6 rules. A part of me screamed to burn the paper and forget I ever saw it. But the part that needed to pay rent went out. I took the job. The tower was even colder and emptier than I expected. It was a single, cavernous room with a rickety spiral staircase leading up to the belfry. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. I set up my small camp chair, pulled out a book, and tried to pretend this was a normal security gig. The town below was unnaturally still, the windows dark, the streets deserted. It was as if the entire population had vanished at sunset. The silence was the most unnerving part. It felt deliberate. Then, at exactly 11:43 p.m., it happened. The bell rang. It wasn't a loud, booming clang. It was a single, perfect, impossibly clear tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I watched the bell through the open archway. It hadn't moved, not a single vibration. I dutifully wrote down the time, my hands shaking. Just after the clock on my phone ticked over to 12 a.m., the voices began. First it was a faint whisper, like wind rustling through the stonework. Then it grew clearer. It was my mother's voice, calling my name, asking if I was okay. Then my best friend, laughing, telling me to open the door. The voices came from all directions, from the street below, from the dark corners of the tower itself, from right behind my ear. They pleaded, they joked, they threatened. Every instinct screamed at me to call out, to answer them, but the 4th rule echoed in my mind. Do not respond. I squeezed my eyes shut and bit my lip until I tasted blood. At 12:17 a.m., the quiet was shattered again. This time, the bell rang twice. Dong dong. The tones were sharp, impatient. The air in the tower instantly changed. It became heavy, thick, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The temperature plummeted. Rule 5. If the bell rings twice, hide. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled from my chair and crammed myself into the narrow, dusty space beneath the spiral staircase. I pulled my knees to my chest and held my breath, and then I felt it. Something passed through the tower. I couldn't see it or hear it, but I felt its presence, a wave of immense, ancient cold, and a focused, searching intelligence. It wasn't just passing through. It was looking for something. It was looking for me. It was only later, after I'd survived, that I pieced together the fragments of whispers and old town folklore. I learned what the bell truly was. It wasn't a clock or a warning. It was a marker, a gateway. The first ring signaled an arrival from somewhere else, a visitor crossing over into our world for the night. The night watcher's job wasn't to watch the town, but to be a silent, unnoticed witness. Lore. And the other rings? The second ring was a departure, a local soul being taken. That's why people left town. They weren't quitting the job. They were running for their lives. The job wasn't about watching. It was about being the bait that someone else, someone chosen by the bell, paid the price for. I'm failure. Failure meant you answered the voices. Failure meant you didn't hide. Failure meant you became the one who departed. At 12:58 a.m., just 2 minutes before 1 o'clock, the bell rang 3 times. Dong, dong, dong. Each chime was deeper, more resonant than the last. This time it felt personal. It felt like it was ringing inside my own skull. The sound wasn't just in the tower, it was for me. I looked at the handwritten rules, my heart hammering against my ribs. The last rule was, if the bell rings 3 times, pray it does not ring again. There was nothing after that. Instructions just stopped. I was trapped in a cold, dark tower with rules that had just run out. As I huddled under the stairs, my flashlight beam shaking, it caught something on the stone wall behind me. It wasn't part of the original structure. It was a new message, scratched frantically into the stone, likely by a previous watcher who hadn't been as lucky. It was a final, unofficial rule. It said, "Do not acknowledge what comes after the 3rd ring." My blood ran cold. Acknowledgement. That was the key. Just then, the ancient wood of the tower groaned, and I heard it. Footsteps. They were climbing the spiral staircase, slow and deliberate. But there was no one there. The stairs were empty. Yet with every phantom step, a stair creaked. The sound got closer and closer, climbing towards the belfry where the bell hung silent and where I was supposed to be. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even think. I just made myself nothing. I don't know how long I stayed like that, a statue of terror under the stairs. It felt like an eternity. But eventually, the first gray fingers of dawn crept through the tower's archways. The oppressive atmosphere lifted like a dissipating fog. The air was just air again. The tower was just an old, empty building. The bell was silent. I stumbled outside, blinking in the morning light. The town looked completely normal. People were walking their dogs, shops were opening. Later that day, the mayor met me. He didn't ask a single question about the night, just handed me a thick envelope of cash and thanked me for my service. He never asked if I'd be back for another shift. I already knew the answer. I left that town the next day and never looked back. I can't live there anymore, because bells sound different to me now. They don't sound like warnings or celebrations. They sound like markers, like countdowns. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm all alone, I think I hear it. A single faint, perfect tone, ringing just for me. And when I do, I close my eyes, I stay perfectly still, and I make absolutely sure I do nothing at all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. Story 2. Everyone in my apartment building knows something I don't. I chose this apartment for 3 reasons. It was affordable, close to work, and most importantly, it was quiet. After years of roommates, traffic, and neighbors who treated walls like suggestions, silence felt like a luxury. The listing even emphasized it. Solid construction, respectful tenants, a peaceful environment. When I toured the building, though, something felt off. No one spoke. People passed me in the hallways, giving polite nods and faint smiles, but they didn't exchange a single word, not with each other. At the time, I just figured it was a coincidence. Maybe everyone was at work, maybe they were just private people. I signed the lease that same afternoon. My apartment was on the 4th floor, at the end of the hall. It was clean and plain. White walls, neutral carpet. No strange smells or damage. Not just empty, but neutral, in a way that made it almost too easy to imagine yourself living there. That first night, I slept deeply, too deeply. I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m., heart racing, with the unmistakable feeling that someone had just stopped watching me. I scanned the room. It was empty, but the silence felt heavy, heavier than it should have. I just told myself it was first night nerves and forced myself back to sleep. Over the next few days, I started noticing the building's routine. Every morning at 7:40, doors would open almost in unison. Tenants would exit, lock up, and walk to the stairs or the elevator without speaking. No one was on their phone. No one wore headphones. There was no casual chatter at all. In the evenings, the same thing happened in reverse. Everyone returned between 6:10 and 6:30. Always. I work remotely, so I was home more than most. I started recognizing people's footsteps, the way they moved, who lived where. But no one ever knocked on my door. No one ever tried to start a conversation. On the fourth day, I decided to test the waters. I ran into a woman from the third floor by the mailboxes. She was middle-aged, neatly dressed, with a very calm expression. "Hi," I said, putting on my friendliest smile. "I'm new here." She froze. It's not like she was startled, but more like she was paused, carefully choosing her next move. "Welcome," she said finally. Her voice was soft, cautious. "Like it here?" "I think so," I replied. Her smile tightened just a little at the edges. "Yes," she said. "It's important to keep it that way." She took her mail and left without another word. That night, I found a note slipped under my door. It was on plain paper, written in careful block letters. It said, "Please keep noise to a minimum after 10 p.m. Thank you for your cooperation." I was confused. I hadn't made any noise. No TV, no music, no guests. I stood in my hallway and listened. There was nothing, just absolute perfect stillness. But once I started paying close attention, I realized the building wasn't truly silent. It breathed. It's not in an audible way, but you could feel it. Subtle shifts in pressure. A faint sense of movement behind the walls that never actually produced a sound. At night, the silence felt organized, maintained, like something was actively preventing noise, rather than it just being absent. Sometimes, when I lay completely still, I felt like the building itself was listening for something, waiting. One evening, I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw it. Every single door on my floor was open, every apartment. People were standing just inside their thresholds, facing inward, not talking, not moving, just standing there, waiting. I hesitated, my grocery bag suddenly feeling very heavy. The woman from the third floor caught my eye from down the hall. She gave her head one tiny sharp shake, a clear warning. Slowly, I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The moment I closed it behind me, the entire hallway went dark. The next morning, another note was waiting for me. This one read, "Please review building expectations." Below, it was a list. Do not raise your voice in shared spaces. Do not play music audible outside your unit. Do not acknowledge sounds you cannot identify. And the last one made my stomach clench. Do not open your door if you hear your name spoken softly. I'd never heard my name in the hallway. At least I didn't think I had. I emailed the landlord asking about these strange rules. The reply came back almost instantly. These guidelines ensure a comfortable environment for all residents. Thank you for respecting the building's needs. The building's needs. That specific phrasing stuck with me, and a shiver ran down my spine. About a week after I moved in, I broke a rule. It was an accident. I was washing dishes and a glass slipped, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sound was deafening in the silence, and immediately I felt it. A pressure wave that wasn't sound. It was a tension. The walls seemed to press in as the air grew thick. My ears started ringing, not from the noise, but from the sudden, intense absence of it. I cleaned up the broken glass in complete silence, my heart pounding in my chest. 5 minutes later, a new note slid under my door. Then it happened. Just after midnight, I was in bed, scrolling on my phone in the dark, and I heard it. My name whispered, softly, carefully. It came from the hallway. I froze, the rules echoing in my head. Do not open your door if you hear your name spoken softly. The voice came again, closer this time, right outside my door. Please, it whispered. We need you to listen. I held my breath, not daring to move. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the presence outside my door recede. I did not sleep at all that night. The next day, I saw the woman from the third floor again. She looked just as tired as I felt. Did you hear it? She didn't pretend not to know what I was talking about. Yes, she said. It's your turn now. My turn for what? I asked. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. For knowing she invited me into her apartment, and we spoke in hushed whispers. She explained that the building had been there far longer than any city records showed. Tenants came and went, but the structure itself remained unchanged. It doesn't like disruption, she said. It prefers consistency. Quiet. It wants awareness, but not interference. I had to ask, what happens if you don't follow the rules? Her eyes drifted toward her own apartment walls. You stopped being a good fit. Then she showed me something I'd never noticed before. Some of the units in the building were empty, but they weren't vacant. They were perfectly maintained, clean. They looked lived in, but there were no people. These belonged to tenants who didn't adapt, she told me. I asked her if they moved out. She just shook her head slowly. They're still here, she said. Just attributed. She explained that the building was old in a way that had nothing to do with time. It existed because people noticed it, lived quietly inside it, and maintained its precious silence. Our quiet awareness was what fed it. Too much disruption weakened it, but too much direct attention angered it. It was all about balance. That night, another note appeared. You are adjusting well. Continue to listen. After that, something shifted. The intense pressure in the apartment eased. The building felt satisfied. As long as I moved carefully and quietly, the silence started to feel comfortable instead of oppressive. That's when I understood the truth. The building didn't want victims. It wanted caretakers. Over the next month, I adapted completely. I learned when to move and when to stay still. I stopped making any unnecessary noise. I stopped inviting people over. I stopped missing conversations. And the building rewarded my compliance with a sense of calm, of safety, of belonging. But there was a cost. One morning I realized I couldn't remember what my old apartment sounded like. The traffic noise, the neighbors' voices, the music hit, all felt distant, like a memory from someone else's life. The building had adjusted me, and I had let it. Just last week I saw a new tenant moving in. They were confused and curious, smiling way too much, and I felt something I didn't expect, a pang of concern. I wanted to warn them. But the rules were clear. We don't speak unless it's absolutely necessary. So instead, I waited until that night, and I slipped a note under their door. Please keep noise to a minimum. I'm still here. I follow the rules, and the building is pleased. But sometimes, late at night, when the silence is at its deepest, I remember what it felt like to live somewhere loud, somewhere alive. And I can't help but wonder, the silence can learn who you are. What does it eventually make you forget? Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Story 3. If you stay past closing, the store starts shopping for you. There's a sign taped to the inside of the glass door at Alder's Market, just below eye level. Most people miss it. Not because it's hidden, but because it doesn't look important. It just says store hours. 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. nitrogen monoxide. Exceptions. After closing, I worked there for 6 months before I learned what no exceptions really meant. I took the night shift job because it was quiet, paid a little better than average, and best of all, it required minimal human interaction. The store itself was old, but everything worked. It had these narrow aisles and low ceilings with fluorescent lights that buzzed with this soft, constant hum but never flickered. There was something comforting about it, predictable, contained. I worked the closing shift 5 nights a week, locking up at exactly 9 p.m. at least. That's what I thought I was doing. On my very first night, the manager, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, handed me this laminated card. These are the closing procedures, he said, his voice flat. Follow them. Exactly. I gave it a quick skim. Lock the doors. Count the registers. Turn off the aisle lights in a specific order. Leave through the employee exit in the back. Standard stuff. But at the bottom of the card, separated from everything else, was one sentence. If you are still inside after 9 p.m., do not shop. I let out a small laugh. What does that mean? I asked. He didn't laugh back. His expression didn't change at all. "You won't need to worry about it," he said. "Just don't be late." His tone made it clear that was the end of the conversation. I shrugged it off. For months, it was just a weird quirk of a weird old store. Then came that Thursday night. It was a quiet one, with only a handful of customers lingering in the aisles. I was tired, my mind drifting, thinking about bills, about how I needed to call my sister, about anything other than stocking shelves. At 8:55 p.m., I started the usual routine. I swept the front, wiped down the registers, and headed for the doors. I was on autopilot. It wasn't until I was halfway to the back office that a cold feeling washed over me. I checked my watch. My heart sank. I hadn't locked the front door. I spun around. The store was empty, silent, or so it seemed. I checked my watch again. 9:03. The lights suddenly felt brighter, harsher than usual. I rushed to the front, fumbled with the keys, and finally heard the heavy click of the deadbolt. I turned around, leaning against the glass, and that's when I noticed it. The sound, or rather the lack of it, the low hum of the refrigeration units, the soft buzz of the overhead lights, it had all just stopped. Not faded out. It was just gone. The store was plunged into an absolute, unnatural silence. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you. And then I remembered the rule on that laminated card. If you are still inside after 9 p.m., do not shop. I scoffed to myself. I had no intention of shopping. Just wanted to count the registers and get the hell out of there. As I started walking toward the back office, my foot kicked something. I looked down. It was a single printed sheet of paper lying on the floor near the entrance to aisle 3. I knew for a fact it was there a few minutes ago. I bent down and picked it up. The heading read, "After Ruse Protocol." My stomach tightened as I read the list. 1. Do not enter an aisle unless necessary. 2. If an item appears out of place, do not correct it. 3. Do not respond to store announcements after closing. 4. If you hear a cart moving, remain where you are. 5. Do not accept items you did not select. This was no joke. This was something else entirely. As on cue, the lights in the store dimmed just slightly, casting long, distorted shadows down the aisles. That's when the store intercom crackled to life. I flinched, the sound ripping through the heavy silence. "Attention shoppers," a calm, even voice announced. "The store is now closed." My blood ran cold. The voice was familiar. It was my voice. It's crystal clear, coming from every speaker in the building. "Please bring your selections to the front." I stood frozen, my knuckles white as I clutched the paper. I did not move. After a few seconds of silence, the announcement repeated, exactly the same. "Please bring your selections to the front." Then I heard it. A faint metallic sound. A shopping cart. It was rolling slowly, the metal wheels making soft rhythmic clicks against the linoleum tile. It wasn't near the front of the store. It was somewhere behind me, deeper in the aisles. Rule number 4 echoed in my head. If you hear a cart moving, remain where you are. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The soft clicking continued for another moment, then stopped. The air seemed to shift, filled with something I can only describe as disappointment. I took a cautious step, my eyes scanning the aisles. Suddenly, a can of soup rolled out from aisle 4, as if pushed by an unseen hand. It spun in a slow, lazy circle and came to a gentle stop right near my feet. Campbell's chicken noodle. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even been down that aisle. Rule number 5 screamed in my mind. Do not accept items you did not select. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I carefully, deliberately stepped over the can, leaving it where it lay. As soon as my foot cleared it, the lights dimmed again, plunging the store into an even deeper twilight. The intercom clicked on again. Assistance required in aisle 6. My own voice said, polite as ever. I ignored it, keeping my eyes fixed on the path to the employee exit. As I passed the end of aisle 6, I saw it. An empty shopping basket, one of the red plastic ones, sitting right at the end of the aisle, just waiting. And that's when it finally clicked. This wasn't a trap. This wasn't some monster hunting me in the dark. The store wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to complete a transaction. It was trying to shop. For me, I suddenly remembered all the weird jokes the other employees used to make. Stories about customers who wandered the aisles too long after closing. People who just lost track of time. Staff would joke that they never left, that they became permanent inventory. I always thought it was just a creepy exaggeration, a way to pass the time. I was wrong. The store wasn't just a building, it was a system, and I had broken its primary rule. I started moving again, carefully, toward the employee exit at the far back of the store. As I walked, items began appearing along my path. A loaf of bread on the floor, a bottle of water sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the main walkway, a small package of bandages next to the fire extinguisher. They were practical things, necessary things, things someone might need to continue functioning. Behind me, I could sense more than hear that the red basket was following, gliding silently and patiently a few feet away. When I finally reached the front of the store again, on my way to the back hall, one of the register screens flared to life. The single screen glowed with a sickly green light. My employee number was displayed at the top. Below it, the words total $0, and beneath that, please confirm selections. I stared at it, horrified. I didn't approach, I didn't move. Then the total on the screen changed $4.73, then $12.89. It kept climbing. $26.41. The store was filling the basket for me, ringing up the items it had chosen. My eyes darted around, searching for any way out of this nightmare. That's when I saw it. Scratched into the countertop of the register, barely visible in the dim light, were more words. Once you check out, you belong to the store. I stumbled backward. The red shopping cart, now full of items I couldn't see, moved closer, blocking my path to the front. My only hope was the employee exit. I turned and practically ran down the back hallway. I reached the door, my hand shaking as I grabbed the handle. It was unlocked. I pulled it open and peered out. But it wasn't the alleyway. It was just darkness. A deep interior darkness. An empty space, like the world beyond the door hadn't been built yet. The intercom spoke one last time. Final call. The voice was different now. Softer. Almost gentle. You can stay, it said. We take care of our own. The red basket glided to a stop beside me. I looked inside, and my breath caught in my throat. It was filled with things from my apartment. My favorite coffee mug, the worn-out paperback I was reading. It's a small framed photo of my dog. My memories, my life, had been translated into merchandise. The store didn't want to trap me with force. It was offering me a deal. Convenience, structure, an endless, predictable routine. No more uncertainty, no more bills, no more worries, just shelves and aisles in quiet, perfect order. And in that terrifying moment, I understood why some people might accept, why some people might stay, but I couldn't. I did the only thing I could think of. With a surge of adrenaline, I kicked the basket as hard as I could. I knocked it over. The items, my things, my memories, scattered across the floor. The lights flickered violently. The oppressive silence finally cracked, replaced by a sound like tearing fabric, and I ran. I scrambled through the employee exit, not into the void, but into the cool night air of the alley. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening boom. I collapsed against the brick wall, gasping for air. I looked back at the store. It was dark. Normal. The doors were locked. I pulled out my phone. The clock read 9:47 p.m. The next morning, I went in to quit. Mr. Henderson didn't ask any questions. He just gave me a long, knowing look and nodded. "You were late," was all he said. I don't shop late anymore. Ever. Some stores close at 9, some close at 10. And some, I now know, never really close at all. So if you ever find yourself wandering the aisles after hours and everything suddenly feels a little too quiet, just leave. Don't wait, because once the store starts choosing items for you, it's already decided that you're staying. Thanks for listening. Story 4. The emergency exit in my office building is not for employees. For almost a year, my office building was just a building, glass, steel, beige carpet, and a low fluorescent hum. 8 floors of shared spaces and the faint smell of old coffee. I worked on the 5th floor with about 40 other people, and every single one of us walked past the emergency exit sign at the far end of the hall every single day without ever really seeing it. It wasn't hidden. Our brains just decided it didn't matter, till one evening it did. I was working late, the office quiet and dim. The sign was standard red lettering, mounted beside the stairwell door. But at the bottom, one line didn't fit. Emergency exit for authorized use only. It just didn't make sense. The whole point of an emergency exit is that anyone can use it. The sign made me feel uncomfortable. The next morning, I asked the guy in facilities about it. "That stairwell?" said, barely looking up from his computer. "Don't worry about it," I pushed back. "But it says authorized use only." He paused, then gave me this thin, practiced smile. "Exactly, and that was it." Conversation over. A few weeks later, we had our first fire drill. The alarms blared, people groaned, and we all shuffled toward the exits. But the floor warden directed everyone away from the weird stairwell. "Use the main stairs," she announced. "Not that one." Someone near me asked why. She just hesitated for a second and said, "Procedure." I looked back at the restricted door, closed perfectly still. After the drill, when the hallway was empty again, I walked over to the door. Up close, it looked newer than the rest of the building. The paint was fresh, the handle polished. I put my hand on the metal bar. It was warm, not just room temperature. It was warm like skin. I snatched my hand back, and the weird warmth just faded. 2 days later, an email landed in every employee's inbox. The subject was just a reminder: in case of emergency, use designated exits only. Do not use the restricted stairwell under any circumstances. No explanation. No Q&A, just a direct order. That should have been the end of it for me. It wasn't. I stayed late again the following Friday, buried in deadlines. The floor was completely empty, the kind of deep silence where every little sound is amplified. At 9:18 p.m., the lights flickered. A second later, the air pressure changed, my ears popped, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Coming from inside the restricted stairwell, slow, steady, and climbing up. I immediately checked the office roster and the security logs. No one else was supposed to be in the building, except for me and the guard downstairs. The footsteps kept coming. They stopped exactly level with the 5th floor, right behind that door. Was frozen at my desk, just staring down the empty hallway. And then, the door handle turned, just slightly, and stopped. It took me a while to work up the courage to go near that door again. When I finally did, there was something new. A small piece of paper was taped right below the sign. On it, in careful, deliberate handwriting, were 5 words. "This exit is not for you." It was like someone wanted to be absolutely, perfectly clear. The next week, I started asking around, really carefully. I'd make casual comments to coworkers like, "Hey, have you ever noticed that weird stairwell at the end of the hall?" Most people just shrugged it off, but a few got this uncomfortable look on their faces. One woman from the accounting department leaned in close and whispered, "Don't talk about it too much." When I asked why, she just said, "Because it notices," and she refused to say another word. So I started watching the stairwell. I noticed certain people went near it, but never during the day. Always late at night. And they didn't just use the door, they would stand near it and just wait. After a few minutes, the door would quietly open for them. They'd step inside calmly, and the door would close behind them. I never saw any of them come back out. One night, I decided to find out what was happening. I stayed late on purpose and hid in a dark conference room with a view of the hallway. At 8:47 p.m., a man from the 7th floor came down. He stood by the stairwell, motionless. He waited. Then, just like I'd heard, the door opened. The stairwell behind him was dark, but it wasn't pitch black. It was lit with a dim, sourceless twilight. He stepped inside without hesitation. The door closed, and the hallway was normal again. The next evening, I confronted the night guard. "People are using that stairwell," I told him. He didn't even try to deny it. He just said, "They're authorized." "Authorized for what?" I asked. He looked at me with these tired eyes and said to leave. I frowned. "Everyone leaves at the end of the day." He just shook his head slowly. "Not like that." I went home and dug into the building's history. I looked up old blueprints, construction permits, ownership records. On all the older plans, the stairwell didn't exist. It only appeared in documents from about 15 years ago, where it was listed as a structural necessity. No other explanation, Nothing. That's when the dreams started. Every night I was on a staircase, always descending but never reaching the bottom. The air was thick and heavy, like it was waiting for something. Sometimes I would hear voices from far below me. They weren't calling for help, they were just waiting. And I would wake up every single time with the same 4 words echoing in my head. You are not authorized. Then came the second fire drill. This time there was no warning. The alarms shrieked, but the backup lights didn't turn on. A smoke machine on our floor malfunctioned, filling the hall with thick, disorienting fog. People started to panic. For the very first time during an alarm, the restricted stairwell door swung open on its own. It was chaos. Everyone was rushing for the main stairs, which were already getting clogged. But the restricted stairwell stood open, looking almost inviting. I could see it clearly then. Darkness inside wasn't empty. It was layered, like looking into deep water. And a voice spoke not out loud, but directly into my mind. Door-eyed personnel only. Through the smoke and confusion, I saw 3 people step forward. They were totally calm, completely focused. One by one, they walked into the stairwell. The door closed gently behind them. A moment later, the alarm stopped. The lights came back on. There was no fire, no emergency. The next day, HR sent out an email announcing that those 3 employees had resigned. Effective immediately, their desks were completely cleared out by morning. That night, I received an email. It had no sender and no subject line. The body of the email contained just one single sentence. Your status has been reviewed. You are now eligible for exit consideration. Attached was a time. 11:30 p.m. At 11:30 that night, I was standing in the empty, silent hallway. The door waited for me. I could feel it a pull. Not a force, but a kind of permission. I reached out and touched the handle. It was warm again, warmer than before. Behind the door, I sensed something shift, something ancient and patient, and in that moment I understood everything. This exit wasn't about emergencies or fires. It was for people who didn't fit anymore, people who were ready to go somewhere else, somewhere quieter, more structured, somewhere final. This wasn't an escape route. It was a removal service. I took a step back from the door. The warmth on the handle faded. The door remained closed. A moment passed. The sign didn't physically change, but its meaning did. I could feel it. My authorization had just expired. I quit my job 2 weeks later. I gave no explanation, no big farewell. The building didn't care. It didn't need to. It had others, and it would always find more. Now, I pay attention to emergency exits. Most are for safety. They're there to save you. But some are for something else entirely. So if you ever see a sign on a stairwell door that says authorized use only, believe it. Trust me, because some exits aren't designed to help you escape. They're designed to remove you. Thanks for watching. Story 5. The bus route that only runs when you don't belong anywhere anymore. I noticed it one night, walking home after missing my usual ride. It was just a simple pole with a small rectangular sign bolted to it. 8. No bench, no shelter, no schedule. Just a route number. Route 0, and underneath in smaller print it said, Final stops only. I stood there for a while, longer than I meant to. Something about that sign felt deliberate, like it had been waiting for me specifically to notice it. I was walking that night because I had just quit my job. It wasn't some dramatic, fiery exit. I just quietly handed in my badge and walked out. I told myself I needed a reset, a change of pace. But the truth was a lot harder to admit. Nothing felt like it fit anymore. My job, my friendships, my daily routines, it all felt misaligned. Like I was living a version of my life that actually belonged to someone else. That night, walking was the only thing that made sense. Standing still made the feeling worse. That feeling of being a ghost in my own story. And that's when I saw it. The bus stop for Route 0, I didn't hear the bus approach. One moment the street was empty, lit by the hazy glow of distant streetlights. The next, it was just there, parked perfectly alongside the curb. There were no headlights cutting through the dark, no engine noise rumbling in the quiet, just a tall, dark bus with dim interior lighting, and its doors were already open. The route display above the windshield glowed faintly, reading, "Oh, in service." The driver just stared straight ahead, completely still, not even glancing in my direction. Something in my chest tightened, a knot of unease and something else. Curiosity. I took a step back from the curb, but the door stayed open. Waiting. I don't really know why I got on. Part of me said it was just curiosity, a weird story to tell later. If I'm being honest with myself, it felt more like recognition. It's like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Inside, the bus had a faint, strange smell of rain and old fabric. The seats were worn down from years of use, but they were clean. There were only a handful of other passengers, all scattered throughout the bus, all facing forward, all completely silent. Near the front, a laminated sign was bolted to the wall. It listed the rules: Route O passenger guidelines. Take the first open seat. Do not speak to other passengers. Do not request a stop. If you recognize a location, do not react. When your stop is announced, exit promptly. And if no stop is announced, remain seated. At the very bottom, in smaller text, was one last line. Not all destinations allow return service. I followed the first rule and took the nearest open seat. No one looked at me as I sat down. And that's what struck me the most. It wasn't like they were actively avoiding my gaze or being hostile. It was just absence. They were physically present, sitting right there, but their attention, their entire being, seemed fixed on something far ahead of the bus. Something beyond the windshield that I couldn't see. As the doors closed with a soft hiss, the bus pulled away from the curb, smoothly and just as silently as it had arrived. The city outside my window began to fade away, faster than it should have. Streetlights stretched into long, blurry lines of light. Buildings thinned out, then vanished entirely into the gloom. After a while, the bus slowed down. A voice came over the internal speakers. It wasn't a mechanical, robotic voice. It was human, but completely flat and devoid of any emotion. Next stop. Pine Ridge. I felt a little flicker of recognition. Pine Ridge. I'd passed through that town once, years and years ago, on a road trip. The rule from the sign echoed in my head. If you recognize a location, do not react. I kept my eyes forward. The bus came to a complete stop. The doors opened. One of the passengers, a man a few rows ahead of me, stood up calmly. He walked to the front, didn't look back, and stepped off the bus into the silent darkness. The doors closed, and the bus continued on its way. I realized something in that moment. The man who left didn't look relieved. He didn't look scared either, just looked complete, as if he'd finally arrived at the one place he was meant to be. Outside the windows, the world stopped making sense. The road kept shifting. Sometimes it looked like smooth, dark pavement. Other times, it was just a dirt track. Sometimes we passed through places that felt familiar, but in subtle, wrong ways, like a memory you can't quite recall correctly. The sky never changed. It was always dim, always overcast, a perpetual twilight. Time didn't seem to pass normally either. I pulled out my phone to check. No signal, and the screen where the time should be was just blank. Then I noticed another sign taped just beneath the first one. I swear it hadn't been there before. It read, "Additional guidelines. Do not stand while the bus is moving. Do not look back at stops once passed. Do not attempt to exit without an announcement. Do not ask the driver questions. And finally, do not ring the bell." Not that it mattered. There was no bell to ring anyway. The bus slowed down again. The flat voice returned. Next stop, Westbrook Apartments. My stomach just dropped. That was where I used to live. The apartment I had left behind after a quiet, personal breakdown that I never told anyone about. The urge to stand up, to look out the window, to say something was overwhelming. I gripped the seat in front of me, clenched my hands in my lap, and forced myself to stare straight ahead. The bus stopped, but this time no one moved. The doors stayed closed. After a long, silent moment, the bus resumed its motion. The voice spoke again, just 2 words. Stop skipped. I let out a shaky breath I didn't even realize I was holding. And that's when it all clicked into place. This bus wasn't public transit. It wasn't just transportation. It was a sorting mechanism. Collected people who didn't belong where they were anymore. People who were caught between things. People who had quietly, almost invisibly, detached themselves from their own lives. The bus didn't force anyone to leave their world behind. It just offered them an exit. A final stop. I finally allowed myself to look at the driver. They were human-shaped. It's honestly the best way I can describe them. Hands on the wheel, posture perfectly upright, face reflected faintly in the glass partition separating them from the passengers. But the reflection didn't move quite in sync with their head. It lagged just a fraction of a second, like it was trying to remember how to be a person. Suddenly, someone 3 rows ahead of me shifted in their seat. They stood up abruptly. "I want to get off," they said, their voice tight with panic. The bus slowed down, but not gently this time. It was a sudden, jarring halt. The flat, disembodied voice returned. "Stop, not assigned." The standing passenger looked around, their eyes wide. "I don't belong here," they pleaded to the silent bus. This was a mistake. The bus remained stopped, but the doors did not open. Instead, the dim interior lights flickered and dimmed even further, plunging the cabin into near darkness. The passenger, slowly, hesitantly, sat back down. And they did not speak again. The stops continued. Some of the names sounded vaguely familiar. Others were completely alien. But each announcement felt closer somehow. More personal, more specific. "Next stop, the job you almost took." No one reacted. "Next stop, the version of you that stayed." I felt a sharp pressure build behind my eyes, but the rules held me in place. The silence held me in place. Then, the announcement came quietly, almost a whisper. "Next stop. Nowhere else." The words just settled over me. They weren't threatening, they weren't comforting. They were just certain. The bus slowed to its gentle stop. The doors opened. I stood up. My legs felt steady, as if this was an action I had practiced 1,000 times. As I stepped toward the front of the bus, my eyes caught something carved into the floor near the door. A small, simple inscription: "Nitrogen monoxide returns after acceptance." Beyond the open doors wasn't a place. It was a threshold, a wide open space without any detail. It wasn't darkness, and it wasn't light. It was just possibility, stripped of all context. I hesitated at the edge of the steps. The driver turned their head slightly. For the first time, they spoke directly to me, their voice a low rustle. "This stop fits you." I nodded slowly. I didn't argue, because it was true. But as I stood there on the precipice of whatever that was, I stepped back from the doorway. The doors paused, remaining open. The driver waited. "This is your stop," they repeated, their voice still flat, but with a hint of finality. "I know," I said, my own voice surprisingly clear. "But I'm not ready." The bus remained perfectly still. Silent passengers did not move. Time stretched. And then, finally, the doors closed with a soft hiss. The bus resumed its silent journey. I sat back down in my seat. My heart was pounding in my chest, but the heavy pressure, that feeling of misalignment, had eased. The disembodied voice spoke one more time. Stop deferred. The bus felt lighter, somehow, less expectant, and I understood then. Refusing your stop didn't anger the bus. It didn't break the system. It just adjusted. There would be another chance, another stop. Eventually, as I sat there, a new line of text appeared on the laminated sign. It glowed faintly in the dim light. A final rule. Passengers who remain too long will be reassigned. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't a reward. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity and no time at all, the bus slowed down one last time. Next stop. Original route. The doors opened. I stepped out, and my feet hit familiar pavement, a street. I turned and watched as the bus pulled away silently and vanished at the end of the block. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up. Time was restored. It was 11:46 p.m. Sometimes late at night, I still see it. A dark bus with the number 0, parked by an unmarked pole, waiting for someone else. So if you ever see a bus that doesn't appear on any maps, if it arrives without a sound, be sure to read the rules. And if your stop is announced, understand that getting off is not the same thing as being saved. Thanks for listening.